The searchlight slid over the water like a sword, white and steady, shaving the darkness clean off the waves. It missed our bow by a whisper. Nobody moved. We kept the engines at a dying heartbeat and let the Solomon Sea carry us. On PT 164, 23 men tried to vanish in plain sight. Vela La Vela's volcanic spine loomed behind us, a black wall blotting out half the sky. Out there, past the foam and shadow, 3 fat shapes rolled on the swell Japanese transports, heavy with men and hope. They were heading for Kolombangara. If they got there, our boys on New Georgia would bleed for it. If we stopped them here, the night would belong to us, not them. The date was July 19th, 1943. My name is Chief Petty Officer Thomas Tom Harrigan, US Navy Reserve. That night I was glued to the twin .5 Zeus, my hands locked around the grip so hard I forgot they were mine. The compass on the bridge gave off a faint green. Beside the skipper, Lieutenant Commander Arthur Mac McPherson, stood our exec, Ensign Robert Dutch Vandenberg, head bent over a notebook full of math I never learned and never wanted to. Behind our stern, deeper in the island's shadow, PT 168 and PT 171 waited like crouched cats, listening for our signal. Everyone asks what it felt like to be part of the secret. Truth? We were too busy staying alive to feel special. The boats were the secret. We were the stubborn part that made them matter. Japan owned the night in the Solomons. Their destroyers ran troops down the slot as if darkness had given them a signed pass. They were trained for it, eyes like hawks, hands that didn't shake, routines that ran without a word. Meanwhile, our bigger ships fought with rules the ocean no longer respected. In narrow waters, size and ceremony got you killed. So the Navy built something that didn't look like an answer at all. 80 feet of laminated mahogany, 3 screaming Packards under the deck, 4 fat torpedoes that could turn a transport into a reef, and enough guns to light up a sky for a minute or two. That was the point, a minute or two. Strike hard, vanish faster, come back tomorrow night and make the enemy wonder if sleep was a thing of the past. I first saw a PT boat in February '43 at Melville, Rhode Island. The recruiter had said hazardous duty and experimental craft and casualty rate, which is a phrase that makes a room feel colder. He didn't say we'd be sleeping on plywood and calling it luxury. He didn't say the hull was wood in a steel war. He definitely didn't say you would come to love the smell of gasoline and salt so much you'd miss it on land. What he did say, volunteers only. That was enough. I'd grown up on Chesapeake water, learned to read a night sky without a book, and I'd had my fill of being a target on a big ship. I wanted speed and choice to decide the instant, not wait for it. Our crew looked like the wrong kind of recipe. Dutch, a quiet Yale math professor who solved angles like they were Sunday crossword clues. Charlie Mendoza, who tuned racing engines in Los Angeles and treated Packards like racehorses. Sparks Patterson, a sub-service radioman who could make a set whisper across the world. Paddy O'Brien, a torpedoman who polished brass like a priest polishes chalices and talked to our Mark 13s like they were prickly saints. Me, guns, navigation when the sky went blind, and a stubborn streak I'd apologize for if it ever stopped saving us. Training was short on speeches and long on bruises. We learned that a PT boat doesn't sail. It sprints, skips, bucks, and punches the dark in the mouth. We practiced firing torpedoes at 40 knots over chop that tried to break your teeth. We learned to navigate with our ears when squalls turn the world into a wet sheet. We learned to think like thieves, not gentlemen cut the lights, kill the noise, and let the enemy walk into our fist. By the time we reached the forward base at Rendova on June 30th, the war had stripped every friendly edge off the tropics. The place smelled like rotting leaves, spilled fuel, and wet canvas cooked in a steamer. Palms hid Quonset huts, drums of gas sweated under netting, and every night the distance muttered with gunfire from New Georgia. We were Squadron 912 boats, one job: break the Tokyo Express wherever it dared to run. Our first patrol taught us humility the ugly way. An enemy float plane saw us too early. 4 destroyers came hunting with lights and 25s, and the sea around us jumped with splashes like boiling stones. PT 158 took a 5-inch shell and went from whole to nowhere in a heartbeat. We escaped through reefs that wanted our props and islands that smelled like traps. We fired nothing. We hurt nothing. We lost 12 men. Back at Rendova, Mac gathered us under a bare bulb and said, quiet as a tide, "We don't duel. We ambush. Or we don't go." We started to change. We used the islands like cloaks, sliding into radar shadows. We ran on one engine when we could, two only when we had to, three only when it was time to grab the devil by the throat. We built a language from small lights and smaller risks, signals that told our packs how to bite together. Coast watchers in the hills, tough men with radios and nerves like cable, whispered times and bearings. Solomon Islanders paddled at night to meet us with news, risking a noose if the wrong eyes saw them. We learned to trust that web and move like we belonged to it. Which brings me back to the knife of that searchlight and the three black hulks rolling our way. The afternoon had bled out hot and slow. By sunset, the sky looked hand-painted pink at the edges, bruised purple in the middle. Paddy had set the torpedoes shallow and fast, muttering to them as he adjusted depth and impellers. Charlie had the Packards tuned to a purr that barely tickled the hull. Dutch walked the deck alone, lips moving as he ran the moon, the tide, the wind, and the charts through that machine in his head. Sparks listened to static like it was music, waiting for the one note that mattered. At 23:47 he raised a hand. 3 large, 2 escorts, bearing 280, speed 18, range 15, he said, like he was telling us the soup of the day. My neck prickled. The ocean always felt bigger right before it made you feel small. Mac didn't raise his voice. He never had to. Come ahead slow, he said. We eased from a crawl to something less than modest. Off our port quarter, PT-168 shifted in the dark. Starboard, PT-171 tucked closer to the island. We'd planned it simple. 2 boats on the flanks, one straight up the gut. Simple is not the same as safe. At 2,000 yards we heard them. A deep, steady thrum under the chop, the sound of big engines pushing heavy lives. At 1,500 shapes stopped being rumor and started being fact. Pagoda bridge on the lead destroyer, cranes and lifeboats on the transports, a thin white lip at each bow where steel broke the night water. At 1,000 yards I could make out figures moving on the nearest deck, casual silhouettes that didn't know our names yet. The destroyer's searchlight snapped on, swung and slid past. The beam was so bright the night around it looked thicker. My mouth went dry. Somewhere behind me, a man swallowed so loudly I heard it. Mac's hand floated above the throttles. Stand by, he said. My thumb found the butterfly trigger on the right .50. The metal felt colder than the air. The belts were loaded API, every 5th round a tracer. We'd tested earlier short bursts into empty sea, then quiet again like wolves clearing their throats. Dutch leaned close to Mac, voice a hush life could fit inside. Hold 5 more seconds, currents with them. Paddy murmured to the torpedoes, easy, girls, straight and true. On the starboard beam, a small flash PT-171's prearranged signal. On the port, another PT-168 ready. Our boat, the middle knife, waited on Mac's hand. Mark, Dutch said, breath even. Mac pushed the throttles forward a hair, then another, then all at once. The Packards came alive like a choir that believed in something. PT-164 rose as if yanked by a rope tied to the stars. The bow lifted, spray whipped past my face, and the night shrank to a tunnel framed by the gun ring and the glow of the enemy's searchlight swinging back. We were moving 30, then 35, then more. The destroyers ahead were 2 walls with teeth. Between them was a street that only fools or dead men would take. We took it. The deck trembled under my boots. My world narrowed to lines. The bright rail of the destroyer to starboard, the darker mass to port, the faint, fat silhouettes of the transports beyond the prize, the point, the reason for all of this. My finger tightened, then held. Not yet. Wait for the spark that counts. On the bridge, Mac's mouth was a thin straight line. Dutch's hands sketched invisible angles in the air, counting under his breath. Sparks pressed the headset to his ear like he could move electrons by will. Charlie nursed the throttles a whisper shy of too much. The searchlight found us. Everything went white and sharp and unreal. Water exploded around our hull in tall, hard splashes. I tasted salt and cordite in the same breath. Somewhere a man yelled something I couldn't hear, and somewhere else I yelled back a word I don't remember saying. Now, Dutch said. Paddy's first fish lunged from the tube with a wet punch, then the second, twin white wakes curving toward a dark belly ahead. I squeezed the triggers. The .50s hammered, steady and mean. Tracers stitched the night in clean, bright dashes that walked straight into glass and steel. Time slowed, then snapped. We were inside the enemy's ribs, too close for sense, too fast for mercy. And then the sea ahead of us bloomed, not with fire yet, not with wreckage, but with a sudden, rising light that turned the black water silver. That was where the night turned. The torpedoes struck like thunder rolling through the sea. The first hit somewhere under the enemy's bridge a deep, gut-punch explosion that blew a column of fire through the night sky. The second tore into the midsection, splitting the transport clean in two. One half lifted out of the water as if trying to escape its own death, then folded and disappeared in a geyser of steam. For a breathless instant, nobody spoke. The silence after a kill was almost worse than the noise, as if the ocean itself held its breath, deciding who belonged on its surface and who didn't. Then the world remembered itself. The destroyers roared awake, guns barking, tracers snapping across the water like green whips. "Hard right," Mac shouted. The Packard screamed, and PT-164 pivoted so sharply the sea tried to throw us off. Shells cracked overhead. One tore the air where my head had been a second earlier, close enough to feel the pressure on my eardrums. I ducked, swung the guns toward the searchlight that blinded us, and let loose. The beam winked out, shattered glass sparkling like stars. "PT-168 reports 2 hits, Sparks yelled from the radio. Through the haze, I saw a second transport bloom into a rolling orange sun. It was loaded with ammunition. The blast hurled flaming debris the size of trucks into the sky. The concussion slammed us sideways, a wave of hot wind hitting like a wall. The Japanese formation disintegrated. Their destroyers tried to maneuver, but they had nowhere to go. The channel was too narrow, the night too wild. One turned toward us in rage, its bow cutting a white scar through the dark water. "Ramming us," Mendoza shouted. Mac didn't flinch. "Hang on," he barked, shoving all 3 throttles forward. PT-164 leapt like a frightened animal, spinning hard. The destroyer's bow passed so close I could read the Japanese characters on its hull. Spray drenched us, boiling from the heat of their guns. I squeezed the triggers until the barrels glowed dull red, walking tracers across the enemy bridge. Men ducked. A figure fell backward into the firelight. Behind us, PT-171 tried to line up her shot, but took a burst of 25mm fire. One shell hit a torpedo that thankfully didn't arm. Another tore through her forward deck, spraying splinters. 171 hit. "She's smoking," Sparks called. Mac's voice cut through the chaos, calm as a compass. "Get ready with the last 2 fish. We're going back through." Back through. Between destroyers that were now fully awake, firing everything they had. Between burning wrecks and screaming water. The ocean boiled. The air tasted like metal. I could feel each engine's vibration through my spine. Dutch was shouting numbers, distances, bearings trying to carve math out of madness. "Steady, steady, fire!" The last torpedoes leapt free, diving into their paths like sharks scenting blood. The third transport tried to turn, too slow, too wide. The torpedoes crossed in a V-shaped wake and vanished beneath her hull. A few heartbeats later, the sea folded inward, and the ship's lights blinked out as if snuffed by a giant's hand. The Japanese guns didn't stop. They fired at ghosts, at the trails of wake we left behind. "Full speed," Mac ordered. "Let's disappear." We ran the Packard screaming at their limit, spray breaking over the bow like shattered glass. Shells fell behind us, each explosion a bloom of white in the distance. The searchlights stabbed wildly across the sea, finding nothing. Within minutes, we were swallowed by the dark again. The only sound was the hiss of the hull slicing through waves. "Status?" Mac asked. 2 fish gone, all tubes empty," Paddy reported, his voice hoarse but steady. "No serious damage. Minor shrapnel holes, 1 gun overheated." Sparks listened to the radio. 171 limping but afloat. 168 still in the fight, both confirming 2 transports sunk. Mac exhaled slowly, a sound halfway between relief and disbelief. "Then we did it," he said. I leaned on the smoking barrels of the .50s, arms trembling. The horizon behind us glowed faintly orange, the fires of what had been an entire Japanese convoy. For the first time in months, the night didn't belong to them. It belonged to us. But victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like exhaustion and salt and a weight pressing on the ribs, the knowledge that we'd won this round only because luck had nodded our way. As dawn approached, we drifted into the shadow of a small island, engines off. The horizon turned grey, then gold. We counted the minutes until sunrise, until we could see our own faces again. The Pacific was calm now, pretending nothing had happened. But in that stillness, the truth hung heavy. 3 wooden boats had just rewritten the rulebook of naval warfare. And deep inside, each of us knew it, the shadow war had only begun. When the first pale light of dawn reached us, it fell on smoke pillars far to the north, black scars on the horizon marking where 3 Japanese transports had gone under. The sea was quiet now, deceptively peaceful, as if the night's chaos had been only a bad dream. But the smell of burned cordite and diesel still clung to everything, to our clothes, our hair, even the wooden deck beneath our boots. We huddled in the shadow of a nameless island, just out of reach of Japanese patrol planes. Palm fronds hung over our hulls like tired flags. The Packards were silent, cooling, ticking softly in the morning heat. Sparks listened to static, waiting for a voice that wasn't the enemy's. Max stood at the bow, one hand shading his eyes, staring toward the drifting smoke on the horizon. He didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was quiet, almost tender. 2 ships confirmed sunk. 3rd heavily damaged. 6,000 troops that won't make it to Kolombangara. Nobody cheered. It wasn't that kind of victory. We'd seen too much water swallow too many men to mistake death for glory, even when they wore the other flag. PT-171 limped into the cove an hour later, smoke trailing from a torn exhaust manifold. Her bow was peppered with holes, one engine half dead. Joey Antonelli, her skipper, waved from the bridge, a ragged salute, tired but alive. PT-168 came next, her superstructure shredded by shrapnel, but she still rode proud. We rafted the 3 boats together, our crews passing coffee mugs, bandages and cigarettes across the gap. No one said it out loud, but we all understood. We'd just pulled off something the Imperial Navy hadn't thought possible. The voyage back to Rendova took 14 hours, slow, cautious, silent. We hid from enemy aircraft under clouds and near reefs, using every island's shadow like a shield. More than once, we killed the engines and drifted, listening to the buzz of Japanese float planes overhead. Every man on board held his breath until the sound faded. When we finally nosed into the camouflaged inlet that served as our base, the air erupted in cheers from the other crews. Men waded out into the shallows to help us tie up. Some were grinning, others crying. In this war, survival was celebration enough. The debriefing lasted all afternoon. Intelligence officers crowded our deck with clipboards and questions. How fast did the Japanese respond? What guns did they use first? Did they attempt evasive maneuvers? Mac answered patiently, Dutch added numbers and bearings, and I described what I'd seen through the gun sight, the flashes, the silhouettes, the way panic rippled through the convoy once the first torpedo hit. When we finished, Commander Bill Spector, the squadron leader, leaned forward and said, "Gentlemen, you've just rewritten the Pacific." Word spread quickly through the fleet, though officially no such mission existed. To protect the secrecy of the PT program, the Navy reports didn't name us. We were simply small craft, mosquito boats, or sometimes just unidentified fast vessels. But in Japanese communications, the panic was unmistakable. Their admiralty had sent frantic messages describing mysterious high-speed torpedo boats appearing from nowhere, attacking under cover of darkness, then vanishing before they could be counterattacked. We'd given them something they couldn't understand, and in war, confusion was as deadly as gunfire. Within weeks, the Japanese altered their entire strategy. Convoys grew larger but slower. Escorts doubled, then tripled. They launched reconnaissance float planes at night, flooding the skies with searchlights. But that only stretched them thinner. Every new precaution they took made them more predictable and easier for us to hunt. We had become ghosts, and every shadow on the water was now suspect. Back at base, life went on in its rough, absurd rhythm. You'd think a secret weapon would come with clean sheets and good whiskey. Instead, we lived in mud and mosquitoes, ate spam until we could smell it in our dreams, and bathed in salt water that left your skin raw. We drank coffee strong enough to strip paint and smoked whatever cigarettes the quartermaster could scrounge. But none of that mattered. We'd seen what these little wooden boats could do. The men started painting names on their hulls: Hell's Breath, Sudden Death, Misbehavin'. Some drew cartoon mascots, grinning devils or Donald Duck riding a torpedo. It was how we kept sane, how we reminded ourselves we were still human in a war that devoured humanity. At night, when the engines were silent and the rain drummed softly on canvas roofs, we'd sit around an oil drum fire and talk not about victories or medals, but about the sea. About how alive it felt when you were racing through it at 40 knots, every muscle burning, every nerve electric. Dutch once said, "We're living faster than time out there." He was right. Each patrol felt like stealing days from a clock that wanted us gone. By mid-August, our squadron had sunk or damaged over a dozen Japanese ships' transports, barges, even destroyers caught off guard. The Japanese sailors started calling us Tengoku no Karu, the ghosts of heaven. They meant it as a curse. We took it as a badge of honor, but victories came with a price. On August 12th, PT-162 failed to return. Later we learned she'd been caught in daylight by a destroyer patrol after engine trouble. The enemy's guns turned her into matchsticks. Only 3 men survived. That night, Mac walked the dock alone. No one tried to talk to him. We all knew what he was thinking about how thin the line was between triumph and oblivion. When dawn broke, he gathered us. Every man who dies in these boats buys time for someone else, a marine, a pilot, a ship that lives to fight another day. Don't ever think it's for nothing. From that day forward, no one complained about the danger again. We understood what we were, not heroes, not victims, but the thin, fast edge of something bigger, the experiment that worked. By the end of the summer of '43, our wooden boats had done what steel cruisers couldn't stolen the night back from Japan. And somewhere deep in Tokyo's naval headquarters, a new phrase began circulating through the ranks, whispered like a superstition among sailors who once thought themselves masters of the dark. They called it the mosquito boat terror. By late August of 1943, the night sea no longer belonged to Japan. It belonged to the hum of 3 Packard engines and the glint of moonlight on mahogany. It belonged to ghosts that struck from nowhere, left ruin behind, and vanished like breath in the wind. We had become what every Japanese sailor dreaded, the unseen. They called us devil boats. We called ourselves lucky. Each mission blurred into the next. The days were heat and maintenance, tightening bolts, patching holes, polishing brass that the salt kept trying to claim. The nights were motion and fear, the feel of spray on your face, the hiss of water against the hull, the sudden tremor when a torpedo hit home. Sleep was a rumor, food an afterthought. But there was a strange peace in the rhythm of it. When you're that close to death every night, living itself becomes a victory. We started to see the changes our attacks were forcing. The Japanese convoys that once raced boldly down the slot now crawled, weighed down by caution. They traveled in larger groups, packed tighter, hoping their combined firepower could protect them. But that made them easier to find and easier to hit. Our base at Rendova grew busier. New squadrons arrived, fresh crews wide-eyed and half-believing the stories they'd heard about us. They'd point at the bullet holes in PT-164's bridge, the scorched wood patched with sheet metal, the blackened gun barrels. "You fought off destroyers with that?" they'd ask. Mac would just smile. "With this," he'd say, tapping his temple, "the rest is noise." That was his gift, calm in chaos, humor in hell. He'd look you in the eye before every patrol and say, "Tonight we're writing the rules." He wasn't wrong. Each engagement taught us something new. We learned to attack in threes, like wolves circling a herd. One drew attention with tracer fire, while the others slipped into range for a kill. We discovered that shutting down 2 engines reduced our noise to a heartbeat, letting us ghost through radar. We figured out that if we hugged the shadow line between moonlight and dark, we were invisible until the moment we fired. Every trick was bought with someone's blood. When PT-166 hit a mine on her way back from patrol, we heard the explosion from miles away, a deep, muffled thud that rolled across the sea. We found nothing but splinters. That night, no one slept. The next morning, Mac ordered us back out anyway. "You don't stop a tide with tears," he said. He was right. The war didn't pause for grief. The Japanese were learning too. They began sending hunter-killer groups, destroyers fitted with radar, their crews drilled to chase us through reefs and fog. They laid mines across the channels we used, forced us to find new routes through the maze of islands. But for every counter, we found a counter to the counter. It became a chess match played at 40 knots in the dark. Sometimes we won by luck, sometimes by instinct, sometimes because one man saw a faint phosphorescent wake where none should be and shouted a warning a second before gunfire lit the night. The base at Rendova became a strange little world of its own, a patchwork of tents, sandbags, and rusted docks, always buzzing with engines and laughter that sounded too loud, too forced. We had no luxuries, no comfort, just the understanding that every day we were still breathing was a borrowed gift. Our food came in tins, our water tasted of metal, and the jungle behind camp reeked of rot and life. Malaria, sunburn, and salt rash were constant companions. We joked that if the Japanese didn't kill us, the tropics would finish the job. But there were moments quiet, impossible moments when beauty slipped through the cracks. A sunrise over the bay, turning the water to gold. A night so still you could hear dolphins breaking the surface. A letter from home, crumpled and sweat-stained, but real. Those were the things we fought for, though few of us said it aloud. Every few weeks, new PT boats arrived from the States, sleeker, faster, tougher. The brass had finally realized what they had in their hands. Factories back home were turning out boats faster than the Navy could assign crews. The Mosquito fleet, once a secret experiment, was becoming a storm. We trained the newcomers in the ways that couldn't be written down. How to smell a destroyer before you saw it. How to read the sea's texture in the dark. How to keep your heart steady when searchlights found you and the ocean turned white with bullets. Mac told them the truth the way only he could. "We're not here to die brave," he'd say. "We're here to live clever." By September, our little flotilla had become the sharpest thorn in Japan's side. Their supply lines shrank, their reinforcements failed to arrive, and their confidence cracked. The myth of their invincible night navy, the one that had ruled these waters since Savo Island, was gone. But victories have weight. Every name scratched off the roster left a silence no cheer could fill. I remember one evening after a patrol, the sun bleeding red over the water. Dutch was sitting on the dock, legs dangling, scribbling figures in his notebook. "You ever think," he said quietly, "that one of these nights the math won't work?" I didn't answer. We both knew it already had for too many. The war was turning in our favor now, but it wasn't over. Every success meant another mission, another gamble against the odds. We'd come to understand that courage wasn't about charging forward, it was about going back out again and again, knowing exactly what waited. That's what the PT boats taught us. That bravery isn't loud. It's quiet, patient, and made of wood and salt and willpower. And as September storms rolled over the Solomons, lightning flashing like gunfire over the horizon, we knew the next patrol would come soon. Because darkness was no longer the enemy. It was where we lived. The Pacific autumn came with a strange kind of stillness. The monsoon rains washed the blood and oil from the decks, the sea turning a milky grey that hid everything beneath it. But for those of us on PT 164, the silence between missions felt heavier than the battles themselves. It wasn't peace, it was waiting. By October 1943, our squadron had lost 7 boats, 7 names, 73 men. They didn't vanish in one grand explosion or cinematic blaze. Some simply disappeared into fog and enemy fire, their radios gone quiet. Others burned, the flames reflected in the same black water that had carried us to victory. Every time we came home, the dock looked a little emptier, and yet every night, new faces arrived to take the place of the fallen boys fresh out of training, trying not to look scared as they stepped onto decks that still smelled of cordite and sweat. The brass back home had taken notice. PT boats were no longer an experiment, they were a doctrine. New squadrons were forming across the Pacific, New Guinea, the Philippines, the Bismarcks. Factories in Bayonne and New Orleans worked day and night, sending out improved designs radar systems that could spot ships in fog, reinforced hulls, stronger torpedo mounts. But no matter how they improved the design, one truth stayed the same. These boats lived or died on the courage of 12 men and the heartbeat of 3 engines. When I returned stateside for training in early 1944, they asked me to help instruct new crews. I didn't want to leave, but Mac ordered it. "You'll save more lives there than you will here," he said. "Teach them how to survive the night." At the Melville base, I saw the next generation, hundreds of young sailors drilling, their eyes filled with that same mix of fear and pride we'd once carried. I showed them how to read water by feel, how to sense the hum of an engine that was about to fail, how to disappear before being seen. But what I couldn't teach, what no manual could ever explain, was what happened to a man after too many patrols. You started to dream in the rhythm of the engines. You heard gunfire in the rain. You caught yourself counting seconds between waves, calculating angles in your sleep. You lived between adrenaline and exhaustion, and you learned that bravery wasn't a single moment of heroism. It was surviving all the moments after. Max stayed in the Pacific. When I saw him again after the war, he'd aged 20 years in 2. But his eyes were still steady, the same calm blue that had seen us through every night. He told me about the next campaigns, the Philippines, the Borneo runs, the desperate Japanese convoys that tried and failed to sneak through under our watch. "The war was too big to see from one deck," he said. "But I'll tell you this, the PTS changed it. The Japanese stopped trusting the dark. And when you take a man's faith in the night away, you take his edge. He was right. We hadn't just sunk ships, we'd sunk confidence. After 1943, Japanese commanders began to delay movements, second-guess their own routes. Each new PT attack echoed louder than the last. Destroyers that once hunted us started fleeing from radar pings that might not even be real. We'd made them fight ghosts, and ghosts are impossible to win against. When the war finally began to turn, when our carriers and bombers pushed west, and the Japanese Navy crumbled, part of that victory had been born in those early nights off Vella La Vella, where 3 wooden boats taught an empire to fear the dark. Many of the men never made it home to see that victory, but their lessons did. The years after the war passed like pages in a forgotten logbook. I went back to sea for a while, then left it behind. But sometimes when I walked near the docks in Baltimore or heard the roar of an engine too clean and modern, I'd catch the ghost of that old vibration, the one that lived in my bones. The world moved on, and steel replaced wood, radar replaced instinct, missiles replaced torpedoes. But deep down, every fast attack craft, every stealth boat that cuts across the water today still carries the soul of the PTS. The technology changed. The courage didn't. Mac died in 1987. They buried him with a folded flag and a brass compass that had once guided PT-164 through the blackest waters of the Pacific. I stood there in my old uniform, the fabric too tight, the years too heavy. When the chaplain finished, Mac's son turned to me and said, "Dad used to tell us those boats taught him what courage meant." I smiled. "Courage," I said, "wasn't what we had before we went out. It was what we found on the way back." Dutch went on to chart ocean currents for Yale, his maps later used for submarine navigation. Charlie Mendoza opened a garage in Los Angeles that became a legend among racers. He'd tell customers, "If I could make a 4,500 horsepower engine push 50 tons through hell at 40 knots, I can make your car sing." Paddy O'Brien stayed in the Navy. He wrote the manual on torpedo maintenance, still used decades later. Every so often, he'd send me a letter that ended the same way. "Those were my fish that did it, Tom. 2 shots, 2 hits. 6,000 soldiers who never reached our boys. Not bad for a bunch of kids in a wooden boat." He wasn't wrong. And sometimes, late at night, I sit in my study surrounded by the yellowed photographs of those days' faces that never aged, grins frozen in sunlight, the black silhouettes of PT boats cutting through silver waves. I close my eyes and I can still feel it, the tremor of the deck, the salt in my mouth, the smell of gasoline and sea air mixed with fire. I can still see the searchlights stabbing through the dark, still hear Mac's voice shouting, "All ahead, full." We were small, fast, and fragile, nothing the world expected to matter. But we did, because we proved something timeless. That courage and ingenuity can make giants fear the dark. That freedom, when cornered, learns to fight clever. And that even in a world of steel and shadows, a handful of men in wooden boats can change the tide of history. The Japanese called us Kumo, no Oni, demons of the clouds. But we weren't demons, we were sailors. And that night off Vella La Vella, when the sea turned to fire and the Empire learned fear, we became more than just men. We became the sound of America's heartbeat in the dark, a whisper across the waves that said, "You will never own the night again.